The meta has developed quite a bit, primarily due to the month-long patch that we've been having. And let's just go over the rundown of the comps because we made a lot of updates on the analysis sections on how to play each and every comp, which we'll get into in just a moment. But in the S tier, not too much has changed. The order changed a little bit, but the main comps are still there. Yuumi, Taliyah, Kaisa, Jax, Duelist, and Samira. These are all going to be your consistent go-tos pretty much in like most of your games, unless you get some wacky augments. A tier, Camille, very good with her augment, or if you get a good admin trait. Viego's solid, but much less compared to the S tiers. Vertical Star Guardian, that's just the more Star Guardian version of Taliyah. Misfortune's kind of in the same category as Viego. Lulu Reroll, this one's actually very underrated. I feel like Lulu's really good alternative to Yuumi. Surueshot Reroll, this is a new comp this week. And then we have the threats, Soraka, Gangplank, Zoe, Duelist Reroll, Super Draven, and Brawler Ashe. Super Draven, it's been definitely overhyped in the past week or two. Definitely not that powerful. That's why it's kind of lowish on the A tier. B tier, we have Wukong, Talon, Kayle, Nasus, and then in the C tier, we have Jinx. So if you want to know what comps are like S+, S-, A+, A-, there is a way to get that. You just subscribe on this link over here. And to get onto this page, you just go to bunnymuffins.lol/meta and then click on the link over here. Onto how to play the comps. Let's start off with Yuumi reroll. Not too much has changed. I prefer rolling at level 5 a lot though, to get the 3-star 1-cost units such as Nasus and Galio. I don't really care too much about Gangplank. I find he takes too much room on my bench whenever I try to 3-star him, and then Malphite's going to hopefully be your main tank after that. A note on the items, we always leave like a little note section down here right beneath the picture. On Yuumi, you need blue buff. There's no doubt about that. But after that, AP items are good. And then this patch, you really want Giant Slayer because a lot of people are re-rolling. And if a lot of people are re-rolling, they're likely above the Giant Slayer threshold. So that's why you want Giant Slayer in a lot of different builds this patch. It's probably like one of my most built items of this patch, actually. If you want a little bit more in-depth leveling pattern, we have the how to play section down here. And then we also have item recommendations down here as well, but it's pretty much, but for Yuumi, it's pretty generic. It's just blue buff plus Giant Slayer plus whatever AP item you can get. It could be hat, it could be Archangels, it could be Hextech Gunblade, it could be Jeweled Gauntlet, literally like anything and you'll be good to go. Tank items, my favorites so far are going to be Sunfire Cape and Ionic Spark, but I work with Void Sins to make this meta snapshot, and he prefers the full tank such as Warmogs, Bramble, and Dragonclaw. So it's really up to you which ones you like a little more. I kind of prioritize the Yuumi items a little bit so I don't get perfect tank items, but whatever you hit in your game, it's going to be the best for that specific game, obviously. On to the next build, Tallyah Carry. This is by far the best forecast because you could do so many positioning tricks to always hit their backline. She stabilizes really hard at Taliyah 1-star, so if you don't get her to 2-star, it's not like completely end of the world during stage 4. In the early parts, Annie is a very cost-effective tank at only just 2 stars and being able to really hold the fort down with actual items. I thought Annie would kind of suck this set, but with Oxforce, she just lives for so long and gets an extra cast off, so she really dominates in that like 2-cost tank area. You could of course cap your late game with Syndra, Fiddlesticks, Janna, so there are just so many different directions you could go with this composition. And another thing is, the board you see here, it could literally be anything. Taliyah works with so many different comps. She works with a bunch of different secondary carriers. She could go Vertical Star Guardian, as we'll talk about later. So it's just like, holy cow, what more do you want from Taliyah, you know? Like, she really did all her job. Also, her items are very flexible. A lot of people, they like Shojin on her, but you don't even need Shojin to play Taliyah. In fact, my favorite combination isn't what you see here. My favorite is Jeweled Gauntlet, Shield Breaker, and Giant Slayer, because it rips through a lot of tanks and also kills a lot of stuff in the backline. Void Sin, he likes the healing a bit from Hand of Justice. He likes the stacking from Archangels. Honestly, though, with Taliyah, like, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Her items don't matter. You could build the Shojin. You could not build the Shojin. You could build full AP. You could build, like, one healing item. Literally anything works on her. It's actually so crazy. But ideally, you just fast 8 or stabilize on level 7 at 4-1. It depends on your health on every game. I'm going to be coming out with some 3-hour gameplay compilations in the next week. So definitely, if you want to know, like, oh, when should I roll on 6? When should I roll on 7? Definitely subscribe for that below because I'll be posting those later this week. Taliyah items we have down here, like literally just pick any 3 and you're good to go. Tank items mainly go on Annie, but if you don't have Annie, Echo will do. Or if you're playing a version without Annie, obviously Echo's going to be your main tank then. But the main core of this comp is pretty much just 3 Star Guardian and then a couple of Spellslinger. I've even done 2 Spellslinger, but it really just depends what units you're hitting that game. On to the next build, we have Kaisa Recon. So this is probably my favorite comp right now just because Kaisa is so cool. Kaisa works in like 2 different builds as well. You have the build you see here with 3 Recon, 3 Star Guardian, and 2 threats. But there's also the build with 4 Recon and just 2 threats. Both versions work. It really just depends what you're hitting that game and what your life total is at and when you can roll. So always do try to be flexible. I'll be doing a Kaisa only video in the future as well, because recently I've been having a lot of success with her. In the early game, you could do 2 directions though. The first is just playing strongest board with an AP opener such as like Gadgeteen or like Recon Defenders, or using Lulu, Lux, or Ezreal as we see here for the item holders. Or you could do a full Econ Lu streak build as well. The great thing about this comp is that you could just slam Static Shiv for a win streak, and then if you happen to get Kaisa, go Kaisa. If not, you could go into other compositions. But if you do the lose streak start, you could just greed your items and get pretty much perfect Kaisa items every single time, and that works pretty well too. Vayne's gonna be your secondary carry, but you really shouldn't focus on her that much. Just focus on tank items and Kaisa items, and that's pretty much going to be it from there. On to the next build, we have Jax. So Jax is very interesting. Not interesting to play, but an interesting comp to look at. It's actually one of the easiest comps that I've ever played, but RFC Jax is just the biggest power spike in terms of an item that I've ever seen. Obviously, if you have scope weapons or a different way to increase his range, he's going to be really good as well. But with the RFC, he is just so much better of a unit. I don't know what it is. But the way to play this comp, you just click all the Brawler units and then just play them. And then if you want later on, add a Soraka to your team. So the main point of playing Jax is to get top 4. And you could do that with Jax 2-star. If you want to win the game, you get Jax 3-star. So there are like 2 different ways to play it. One way is to use one of the Brawler emblems or Brawler crests on Jax, and that way you could get 8 Brawler at level 8. That's like one of the easiest ways to just automatically top 4 in some of your games. If you want to play for first, you could re-roll for him on level 7 to get him to 3-star, but really, like, the choice is yours. It's going to be dependent on how your game is playing out. I'm going to leave the old build of Jax here still, just in case he gets nerfed in the next patch or changed, and I'm assuming Mecha Prime is going to be a little more relevant next patch, but until that time, do the RFC build. The RFC build is just so much better than any other build out there. So you definitely want to do bow starts. We'll get into item starts later and what you should be taking on the first carousel. Bow is probably my first go-to, and playing Jax and Kaisa is definitely one of those reasons why. On to the next build, we have Duelist. Duelist as well. All 3 of those comps that I just mentioned, they all like bows. This comp is really funny because it is the freest top 4 you'll ever see. I don't know why Hecarim's in the corner there. You want your Zed jumping on with the Hecarim. I think the lol chest thing bugged out, but we'll fix that in the future. One important thing that people don't realize with this comp is that you need some sort of frontline, and Locket is one way to get that. So a lot of people, they play Duelist and then they get a bunch of rods and they're like, what can I do with the rod? So they make a Morellonomicon just because they're like, oh, let me just build it to get rid of the rod. But Locket's very, very important because it gives you the much needed frontline that you need. Because look at your team. Who are the actual tanks on this team? It's just Sejuani, right? Nyla kind of a little bit. But really, like, Gangplank, Yasuo, Fiora, like Zed, they all benefit from the Locket a lot. That's why people are building it. I wouldn't go out of my way to build the Locket, but if you have rods, just kill the rod by getting a chain vest and just locketing people up, because there's going to be some games where you just get weird items that don't really fit in AD, such as tier and rod, and those are great ways to kill those items. Speaking of items for Zed, you really only need Edge and Knight on him. That's by far his best item. The other 2 items that you put on him, I prefer Runons, so does Void Sin, and then third item, I just build whatever I can get and slam to save HP. But some people are really liking Last Whisper. He likes Infinity Edge. I don't really know what my favorite third item on Zed is. It might be Giant Slayer. It might be the Infinity Edge as well. I don't stress too much about it. I just slam items early because with this comp, you're really just playing for a top 4. So it's really hard to win with Duelist unless you get super high roll, go level 9, and play like a bunch of legendaries. So you have to keep that in mind when you're playing the comp. This is like for sure just a top 4 comp, and you're just going to get like 4th, 5th, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 3rd, like every single game whenever you play this. So as long as you play to that condition, you should be able to do that pretty consistently. Items, all the items we like are listed down here. We have the core units over here, and we also go in depth on how to play this on like what you want during stage 2, when to itemize your secondary carry, things like that. But typically people are rolling for this on either level 7 at 4-1 or level 8 if they're super high rolling. On to the next build we have is Samira. So Samira's a little weird. You need Last Whisper on her. We have like the requirements here. Last Whisper 100% required. Don't ignore the requirements section because it's very, very important, and there are a lot of like assumptions built into it. So just to remember not to forget about that. The comp you see here looks a little funny, and I'll explain why, because you may notice you only have Samira to do damage. Aphelios, you just take stun gun every time. Like, just don't even bother picking the other guns. A lot of people are doing like research into like, oh, when do I take the right gun or the left gun? Just take the middle one, the stun gun, because Aphelios is like just pretty bad right now. Even at 2-star, I think Samira just does more damage, and it's perfectly fine leaving him as a support unit. And that brings me into my next point. We have 6 tanks out here. You really just need tanks with Samira because you scale automatically with the Sureshot trait, and she'll eventually kill everyone. It's going to take her a while, but she'll eventually kill everyone if you have a adequate front line. So just focus on 3 Samira items and then just full tank items after that. So if I had the choice of like 10 items, I would pick 3 Samira items and 7 tank items. I wouldn't pick any Aphelios items in a perfect world. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, so whatever leftover AD items I get, I drop that on Aphelios. But if I can help it, I buff up my tank line, such as itemizing Sejuani, Zac, and Echo, whoever I 2-star first. And then if I get Nunu too, like, yeah, sure, put it on him also. The way to play this comp, you could do underground starts into Samira. That's probably the best way to get into this, but we don't always get underground early. So I'm not going to cover that scenario, because if you do get underground early, it's super easy to change into this because you get a ton of items, you get a ton of gold, and then you will hit Samira too, most likely. But let's say you don't and you want to play Samira, you started the game, you're in stage 2, you built a Last Whisper. You'd pretty much just play strongest board and then you wait till you roll down for Samira 2, and just use like Senna as an item holder. 2-star Senna is better than 1-star Samira in my experience, so only swap the items once you have Samira 2. Also keep in mind that the front line's pretty flexible. Samira is great, same with Misfortune, in that they're both aces, so they don't need that many complementary synergies to really beef themselves up. So all this front line you see, these could be all types of different units. They could be all types of different legendaries. You could run like Fiddlesticks, Leona. You could run the Rammus Cho'Gath threat combo. It's really going to depend on what you're seeing in your shops, and you just need any sort of front line. So just play around whatever you 2-star first, add synergies to that, and then build off of the units that you additionally add in. So for this one, let's say we started off with like a Vi because we were playing Underground. We're going to add Brawler with Sejuani. Vi is also an Aegis, so we're going to add Alistair and Echo. And then Alistair's a mascot, maybe add in Nunu. Things like that. You kind of have to mix and match whatever pieces you have to kind of complete the tank puzzle. But let's move on into the A tier. Camille is highly augment reliant, but if you get the carry Camille augment, there are going to be a lot of free wins on your plate if you manage to hit Camille 3-star. But that's the trouble though. That's why Camille's A tier, not S tier, because unlike Yuumi, Yumi's pretty much guaranteed win if you hit. Yuumi also isn't as reliant on augments as Camille is, so that's the difference between Camille and Yuumi. That's not to say Camille is bad, it just means you can't play her as often as the S tier comps, and that's why she's a little lower on the tier list. It's a 2-cost reroll, so you just roll at level 6. That's the one difference between her and Yuumi. Yuumi likes rolling at level 5 first to get the mascots to 3-star, but Camille, she only cares about herself, so you just re-roll for her at level 6. Another awkward part about this comp is that at level 6, the only 2 cost you're looking for is Camille, so it's a little bit inefficient on the rolls, but the reward, if you get Camille, definitely does pay itself off. On to the next build, we have another Renegade build. This is instead Oxforce though, with Viego. Not quite as good as Taliyah if you're doing the AP route, but hey, we're not always blessed to find Taliyah. Sometimes you get a free Viego too. Sometimes you get a really good early game Renegade start and then you want to play Viego. Those are typically the situations where I go for this comp. If I'm going AP this patch, I'm pretty much always going to be going Taliyah. And unless something crazy happens, such as like very specific augments, such as Renegade augments, hitting a Viego 2 for free or hitting a Viego 1 super early, like I'm normally just playing Taliyah, but you know, I'll give this guy a shot once in a blue moon. The best way to play this, since the comp is pretty expensive, is you want to try to roll at level 8, but getting to level 8 is a little hard in this current meta because it's a lot faster and people are rolling much earlier. A lot of the reroll comps just means that they outscale you if they get even just a tiny bit more luckier than you. For example, would you rather have a 2-star Viego or a 3-star Yuumi? Personally, for me, I'd much rather have a 3-star Yuumi. So that's one reason why fast 8 strategies or like fast 8 comps aren't as good on this patch. And until they change either player damage or like the strength of certain reroll comps, all the fast 8 comps are going to be a little weaker. Also, Viego 1 does not stabilize as hard as Taliyah 1, so that's another reason why this comp is in the A tier instead of the S tier. Next build up we have is the Star Guardian Taliyah build. This one's more focused on spreading out the love in terms of the Star Guardian, so Echo gets some tank items, Kaisa gets like the Static Shiv combo. We're only running 2 Spellslinger, but we generate like a ton of mana from the Star Guardian trait. So this is great for Syndra comps. I think Syndra is probably the best hyper late game champion because she counters a lot of the units in the meta. So if you think about it, like Jax, Yuumi, those are probably the 2 most oppressive comps right now. And Syndra counters them because they're both single target and Syndra throws in a new target for them to hit with a single target ability. So if you ever throw in a Zac, the Yuumi has to cast 3 times to kill off that new Zac that you just threw in. So if you ever face a lot of Yuumis or Jax, like just play Syndra in the late game and like, yeah, she's gonna be doing a lot of countering for you there. Now you might be wondering, when do I go for Vertical Star Guardian Taliyah versus the regular Taliyah build? Well, this build is really cheap. You may notice we're running Lux, we're running Yuumi, we're running Rel. So if you ever find yourself in those situations where you have like no gold, like let's say you get a low gold start to the game, you don't get that much interest early on. Maybe you accidentally leveled up too early, you accidentally hit your level up key and you're like low on gold that game. Those situations are the best times to play a cheap build like this because you get a lot of power from the vertical trait and your team comp is quite cheap compared to the other ones. I think the other Taliyah build, we had like 3 or 4 different legendary units, maybe like 2 or 3 4-cost units. This one has like 1 and 2-cost units, you know, so it's definitely a lot more affordable. What that also means is that in the how to play section, like you typically want to roll a little bit earlier whenever you play this, just because you benefit a lot more from getting like Rel 2, Kaisa 2, Alistar 2. So rolling on either 3-2 at level 6 or 3-5 at level 7, definitely a lot more beneficial in this comp than other ones. On to the next build, we have Misfortune. Misfortune suffers the same fate as Viego. It's like when you're playing AP, you prefer just going for Taliyah. And since I personally don't build Shojin on my Taliyah, I don't have the Shojin for Misfortune whenever I do see her in my shop. If I did slam a Shojin early, then yeah, sure, I'll gladly take a Misfortune, but she really needs Shojin. If not, she is completely useless. There are other ways to activate her. For example, like Wukong's Re-Energize Augment is really good for her. Sona's Mana Augment is pretty good too. There's another champion with a Mana Augment. I forget who it was. But anything that gives Misfortune mana is extremely good. And those are typically the only situations where I'll play her. Spear Shojin obviously is another one as well, and if I see her for free in my shop, similar to how I would switch into Viego from like a Taliyah build. I'd say the one benefit to the Misfortune comp is that she is super flexible. You could play her in any comp. You don't even need 3 Anima Squad to play her, because if you actually read Anima Squad, it gives 10 AP and 10 attack damage, which really isn't that much, right? So you don't actually need to run the trait. So you could just throw her in like a threat comp with threat tanks. You could play her with like random bullcrap legendaries. Literally any build can do with MF, and that's like the one advantage to her. So I guess that's why she's a little weaker compared to the other 4-costs, because she's a lot more flexible than other units. Lulu Reroll, this is like the new kid on the block kind of, because it's taken over some of the Yuumi's steam, because you're stealing all their mascot units, and when you roll at level 5, you do your slow roll. Lulu is a 1-cost unit, right? So you could just pick her up for free, whereas the Yuumi players, they have to wait till they get to level 6. So you could spike a lot faster with the Lulu comp, and it does like almost the same, you know? Like if I had to choose between a 3-star Yuumi and a 3-star Lulu, like obviously I'd choose the 3-star Yuumi. But that's like asking me if I want a steak from like a 5-star restaurant versus like a 1-star restaurant, you know? I'm gonna like the steak no matter what, just because I like eating steak. But if I had to choose in a perfect world, obviously I'd take the one at the nicer restaurant. That's kind of the case between Lulu and Yuumi. But at the same time, like, money is a thing, right? Like, I don't have unlimited money to always eat at the 5-star steak restaurant. So sometimes I go for the Lulu one instead. And that's pretty much the situation we're seeing here. Lulu is much cheaper, and when you roll for Galio and Nasus, she shows up in your shop a lot because you're at level 5. You just buy her, complete her, and take a top 4. Sometimes you could win if you get to level up really quickly afterwards, but you're going to get outscaled by like other comps eventually, which isn't the end of the world because that's really all you need from this build. But if you haven't tried the Lulu comp yet, I highly recommend doing so because it is pretty much the same power as the Yuumi comp. I guess a better analogy is like, think of Yuumi as like the brand name snack at the supermarket, and then Lulu's like the supermarket brand, you know? It's pretty much the same thing. You build the same items, you go blue buff, AP plus Giant Slayer, and then you arm up the same tanks. It's like Galio, Malphite. You focus more on Galio in this comp because he's pretty much guaranteed to be 3-star because you're not rolling on level 6, you're rolling at level 5, so it's harder to get Malphite, but yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. On to the next build, we have Surueshot Reroll. This is a new comp of the week, and this one is with Senna Reroll and Sivir. So Senna, she's decently strong. I will say I have not tried this comp myself, but Voidson has played it a bit, and he's also seen other people play it a bunch. But hey, if you get the start for Senna, like, you might as well just go ahead and play her. So the way to do this is you focus on Sivir first. You get her to 3-star, you get Malphite, Lee Sin to 3-star, maybe Galio and Gangplank as well. And then you level up to level 7 and then re-roll for your Senna 3. It's a little bit tricky on like how to play this comp. We have like a write-up down here, again on the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta, updated every Friday. But one important thing to note is that in my Samira comps, I often do run for Sureshot, but in this reroll build, you don't want to do that because it's hard to push up the higher levels, so you're probably not even going to see Samira and Aphelios anyways. But another thing is you need the tank line to just kind of kill time for your team for your guys to stack up. Extra units you could play past level 6 are things like Urgot, Fiddlesticks. You could throw in maybe like a Zac if you can't get the legendary units. You could also just do the Rammus Cho'Gath stuff depending on what your lobby is playing. That's pretty much all there is to it. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this comp. It's pretty much like the new comp of this meta snapshot. So let me know down in the comments how this goes for you if you do end up trying it. On to the next build, we have threats. So I don't really like the threat build, but I see some people play it. If you get a free Bel'Veth or like you get a free Aurelion Soul, like, yeah, sure, play it. I normally flex into this comp rather than just playing it outright unless I get the, the threat level maximum augment. And I guess one fun fact about this build, a lot of people ask me, does build different work on threats and does double trouble work on threats? It does not, so do not play threats with those augments because it's a waste of the augment. That's not to say you can't run a random threat just to splash in, but don't make it like the main part of your comp because those augments don't work with this trait. The best way to play this is to focus on a 4-cost leveling strategy, so you typically want to do like a level 8 roll down, which again on this patch is a little bit weaker. So that's why this comp is a little lower in the A tier compared to everything else. Let's move on to the next build though, and that is the Soraka carry. So Soraka, I'd say she's actually like semi underrated right now. There are a couple of heart builds running around. There are a couple of Brawler, Soraka builds running around. I guess that's the Jax build, but you focus mainly on Soraka instead. But I'd say overall, she's like a pretty solid carry because she has built-in healing, so you don't need Celestial Blessing. You don't need to build a Gunblade on her because she already heals herself a little bit, so you could focus just on damage. The only bad part about Soraka is that she requires blue buff. She's not playable without it. I mean, she is playable, but like her power level is like dramatically increased with the blue buff. It's like having RFC on Jax versus no RFC. Blue buff just like completely multiplies her damage. Compare Soraka to someone like Taliyah. Taliyah doesn't need any items. She could use like her best items, right? Like who doesn't want their best items? But Taliyah is also pretty flexible in that she could use pretty much any item and have approximately the same power levels. That's not the case with Soraka. You need the blue buff. If not, like I wouldn't even bother playing this comp because yeah, it's just too good, right? But to get into this comp, you just play like the typical AP early game start, and then let's say you slammed a blue buff early because you thought you were playing Yuumi. Maybe you're contested on Yuumi. You could just go for Soraka instead. I actually had a game on this recently, so I'll leave that in a card up on the top right or wherever it pops up, just so you guys can kind of check out some gameplays where you're like, oh, I'm contested. I already built a blue buff. What champions can use it? Pretty much only Soraka can. And then I guess Sona can use it too. But essentially, like sometimes whenever you're forcing Yuumi or Lulu, you're just not seeing the unit and you have to pivot out of it later on. This is definitely a good option for that. Onto the next build, we have Gangplank supers. There are a lot better rerolls to go for, and everyone's griefing your supers anyway, so only go for this if you get like a very, 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 very good start for it. So if you get like a ton of supers randomly, like sure, go for it. Maybe you get like a loaded dice, you want to do like loaded dice supers. I don't know if that's like actually a thing or not, but yeah, you could go for it then too. But again, since all the Yuumi players are taking supers and like a couple other reroll comps do as well, like I don't like the Gangplank build as much. But we'll leave it in the A tier for now. Zoe reroll is pretty fun. I use Zoe mainly as like an item holder. I don't really use her as my primary carry, but let's say you're playing Zoe in the mid game as your item holder, and then you see like a bunch of Zoes in your shop and you hold on to them and it's not costing you any interest, and then you like see even more of them later on. You could consider doing like a Zoe reroll build. It's not the best thing ever, but if you play her with like some sort of secondary carry, the comp does like pretty decently. The secondary carry can literally be anything because Zoe doesn't require any traits to activate herself. I guess like Hacker helps a little bit because then she gets free healing, but she really doesn't benefit that much from any particular trait. Like Prankster's kind of fake on her because you position so she doesn't get targeted anyways. Gadgetine gives you an extra item, but you're not putting that on her either. So you're really like not really that worried about traits on Zoe. So you could play her with almost anything. And that's why the board you see here, it's like kind of a fake board because all these units don't have to be here. If you get a bunch of AD items, run her with Zed. If you get a bunch of AP items, you could run her with like Taliyah or LeBlanc as seen in this picture. So a lot of different options you could go for. But again, typical early game AP start. AP starts are pretty good. We'll get more into that in the items later on. Yasuo reroll, this is just typical 2-cost reroll. The great thing about this is that you're going for a bunch of 2-cost units. You have Fiora, Yasuo, and Vi, and you focus mainly on Fiora and Yasuo. The bruiser items mainly go on Fiora, the AP items go on Yasuo, and there's not too much like about this comp. If you get Siphoning Winds, that's like the sign to kind of go for it, and it steals a lot of games. This might be like a very high win rate augment, if I had to guess without checking. Just because if you do get this with the Yasuo 3, it's like pretty hard to stop him because he just gets so much healing that it's actually insane. But yeah, you just go to level 6, reroll there, and then that's pretty much all there is to it. It's like a very easy comp to play. Next build up, we have Draven reroll. Same concept, except I feel like Draven's so overhyped, and I really hate this unit. I don't think he's that great at all. But a lot of people still play him and swear by him, so that's why we included on the list. It's not that he's horrible, I just think there are better things to go for. For example, if you're going for a wacky reroll comp at 2 costs, he uses very similar items to Camille, so why wouldn't I just go for Camille reroll instead? Obviously, if you get a specific Draven augment, like sure, like it's obviously going to be better on Draven than Camille because like you don't have the Camille augment. But in those cases, I'd rather just play other AD comps such as like Samira or maybe even Zed if I have like one bow or something like that, and use like the sword for Edge of Night or whatever it is. But that's pretty much all there is to it, just 2-cost reroll. So you go up to level 6 on 3-2 and then slow roll for Draven or stabilize there. Next build up, we have Ashe reroll. I would only do this with the augment, and this comp gets outscaled pretty hard, mainly because Renekton got a lot weaker with the nerf he had in the previous patch. I'm not saying it's a bad comp, but you just need very specific augments for it. So you'll notice like we're kind of going through these other comps really quickly, and that's because like there's so many options to choose from in the S and A tier comps that there isn't really much of a reason to play a lot of these other builds unless you get very, very, very specific starts for them. Obviously, if you do get that, like sometimes they're free first places. Like I faced this Wukong reroll guy with the Wukong Cyclone augment. That's the Wukong's carry augment, and he was steamrolling everyone. None of the fights were even close, but you need to hit it early, and you also need the specific Wukong augment. So you're not gonna like go out of your way and like start off your day, you wake up, brush your teeth, and then you're like, I'm gonna play Wukong reroll in my next game. That's not gonna happen. The only time you play these like weird reroll comps is like, oh, I see the augment early on, and you have a bunch of the copies of the unit. So let's say you start off the game with a 2-star Wukong, and then you see the Wukong augment, and you're like, oh, I have a couple of components for the items that Wukong wants as well. Those are really the only scenarios you can play those you can play this comp. And then after all those scenarios are met, you still have to hit the comp. So you need 3 requirements: the augment, the champion, and the items, and you still need to hit him 3-star. So there's like a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, and that's why I typically don't spend too much time learning these comps, because if you do get them, the game plays itself, and if you don't get them, like, you're not missing out on much, because I'm just playing the S tiers, you know? Talon reroll, same thing, except this is weaker than the Wukong comp, I believe. If I'm going for a Viego build, if I have like a Renegade start and then I get like too many Talons, or I get the Talon carry augment, like, you could go for it, but again, it gets outscaled compared to some of the other builds. Kayle reroll, this build is actually pretty good. I've been trashing the rerolls a bunch, and I think that's unfair with Kayle because I think she does scale really decently, and you could just play her with the regular Duelist build anyways. You don't have to play the supers version, so it's a pretty decent way to kind of like build your early game, and she'll wipe a lot of teams in the mid game if you manage to get her 3-starred. Mascot Nasus, stacks on stacks is like the only time you would play this. I had a game today where I started off, it was stage 1-4, and I had 5 copies of Nasus, and I had 2 bows on my bench, so I was like praying for the stacks on stacks augment. I just didn't get it, so I was like, oh, I guess these Nasuses are useless. So then I just ended up selling him and playing other stuff instead. Again, that goes with the Wukong story I told you guys about earlier. You need copies of the champion, you need the augment, and you need the items in order to go for these comps. Unless those are met, just play some of the other stuff instead. But for the comps, that's going to be it. Let's go move on into the items. Now let's move on into the items. So my favorite item start of this patch is definitely going to be the bow, hands down. Giant Slayer, just so required. Giant Slayer's everywhere in the item recommendations, but let's just look at the top comps for a bit. Like, Yuumi does not use bow, so that's one pass there. Taliyah, Giant Slayer's good, Static Shiv's good, ZZ Rod's pretty good. Kaisa, obviously she needs like infinite bows for like Static Shiv, Rage Blade, Giant Slayer, I mean the same items that we talked about before. Jax, RFC, you need 2 bows. Duelist, Runons. You could even build like Titan Zed. You could build Last Whisper. Samira, definitely Last Whisper, very needed component. So you just think of the comps that need the bow. It's just so many, right? Tier is really good because Yuumi is the best comp, so you always leave that option open. If you're playing Jax, you could also build a blue buff for your Soraka later on. Rod, just great for Taliyah. Tier, also good for Taliyah. And then Belt, just general good defensive items. Sword, builds Giant Slayer, good for AD. Chain, is whatever, you know. Glove, whatever. I actually used to love Glove start because I'm a Thieves Glove fan. So if you're playing like Super Flex, I think Glove is really good because you just build either JG or IE, depending if you're going for AP or AD, or you just build like some Thieves, and worst case, late game, it becomes a Shroud or something like that, or like a Hand of Justice if you're playing Flex. But the game isn't Flex right now. That's why it's pretty low on the item priority list. And then Negatron I'm not a fan of it, but it does build Runons. If I think about the items individually, they're all pretty good, right? Like, BT is pretty good in some comps, sometimes required in some comps. Ionic, very good for AP. Chalice, very good for AP. Runon's very good for AD. It's not the worst thing in the world. Even like Dragonclaw is really good, but right now, like, everyone's playing a lot of AD. There's like Jax, Duelist, Samira, and then like a bunch of the rerolls are mainly AD. So that's why Dragonclaw isn't like as useful. Also, like, Yuumi dodges your Dragonclaw a lot, so you don't care. Same with Taliyah. Taliyah shoots your backline automatically, so having like a magic resist tank isn't as useful as having like an armor tank. I guess once Misfortune becomes meta, having a Dragonclaw is going to be much more useful because she only hits your front line for the most part. But until then, like, yeah, I don't think Negatron's that good. But that's going to sum it up for today. Let me know your thoughts on this meta snapshot. Let me know what comps are working for you. Let me know what rank you are, or just like say hello down in the comments below. And I hope to see you guys in the next week. I'll probably update this video again in the next week. We'll have to see, because I realized this isn't a 4-week patch. It's actually a 5-week patch because we had the B patch as well. So we had the first week and then 4 weeks of the B patch. So that's 5 weeks total on this patch, which is quite a bit. I don't think it's ever been this long. But, you know, it is what it is. But, yeah, I'll hope to see you guys in the next video, I guess. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe. And of course, smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.